Hello, this is Rob, and you're listening to North Country History with Rob Berg on the road on the 2025 podcast tour. Today, I'm talking to you from Hinckley, Minnesota, and I'm going to talk to you today about some myths and legends of the North Woods in a little episode I'm calling What the Heck is a Hodag? And it's inspired by my visit yesterday to Rhinelander, Wisconsin. So settle in, sit back, and enjoy the show. North Country History with Rob Berg, your podcast on the forest history of the Great Lakes region. So we're on the road here for the podcast, and if I sound like my voice is a little scratchy, it is. It's with all the wildfire smoke and dust from traveling. Really did a number when I was in the Pigeon River and for 4 days on country roads. It was so dry. There was dust everywhere. So breathing that in hasn't helped at all. But I'm going to try to muddle through this and tell you a little bit about the hodag. And you're probably wondering what the heck is a hodag? And that's what I'm here to explain to you today. The hodag is like Paul Bunyan and the agropelters, side-hill gougers, and squonks. And you're wondering, what are those? You've heard of Paul Bunyan. But what they are, they're tall tales created or repeatedly told in the logging camps, usually to mystified greenhorns, new loggers, and it was a way for the older guys, the guys who've been the experienced loggers, to kind of pull the leg of the new guys. And they had people believing that there really was Paul Bunyan, or that there's these strange creatures roaming the woods and they had to be careful. If a tree branch fell on a windy day, it wasn't the wind that caused it. It was up in the wood, in the trees, was an agropelter, ape-like creature that would break off limbs from a tree and throw it down at an unsuspecting shanty boy walking through the forest. That said that if you looked up and you caught sight of him, it was too late. You didn't get out of the way in time, and that limb was going to hit you square on the head, and you were going to be dead. So the idea was, if you heard a crack, then get out of there real fast. Squonks and side-hill gougers were various animals, creatures that lived in the forest. Some of them were rather calm or tame, but others were dangerous and could devour you. A side-hill gouger lived on the side of hills and had one set of legs shorter than the other set. That ran on 4 legs, and the right side legs might be shorter if they ran to the left, the left legs being longer for the steeper part of the hill, or you had ones that were shorter on the left side and longer on the right, and they ran to the opposite side along the hill. So what you needed to do to get away from them is start running up or down straight on a hill. Do not run directly straight in front of them. So, that was another animal there. And, we certainly all know of Paul Bunyan, and he was actually a story that came about in 1906 in Oscoda, Michigan. James McGillivray, the author of the first Paul Bunyan story, Round River, said that he heard it growing up working in the logging camps on the Osable River. But by the time he published it, he had been a writer for the Oscoda Osable Press and also the Detroit News, and he wrote it, and it was first published in the Oscoda Osable Press. And Paul Bunyan was just the name of a character in there, but stories kind of grew after that. And in Minnesota, there is claims that he was created by a lumber company in Minnesota. But the look of Paul Bunyan and the addition of Babe the Blue Ox did come from this lumber company's advertising in Minnesota. But the original printed story dated back earlier to Michigan. But stories heard in the logging camps could go back all the way to Maine of Paul Bunyan or of similar mythical-sized men and their great feats in the forest. But today we're going to talk about the hodag. And the hodag is unique to unique to Wisconsin, in particular Rhinelander, Wisconsin. And it was created in 1896 by a man named Eugene Shepard of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, along with Lakeshore, Kearney. And it was the hodag was purported to be discovered by Shepard, and that he found it and caught it. And then while it was alive, he would show it at fairs and at different places. Of course, it wasn't ever actually alive. It was not real, but it was a beast that was approximately the size of a bear, had green skin and fur, had horns, and then the back was spiny and spiked, like a stegosaurus. And it could swing its tail and could knock you off your feet. And it became very popular in the region around Rhinelander, to the point where Rhinelander is the home of the hodag, and you can see a dozen hodags or more in the city of Rhinelander. And the Rhinelander High School mascot is the hodag. They are the Rhinelander hodags. So this is, unique to Wisconsin, but it has taken on a life of its own. And everywhere you turn, there's a hodag here and a hodag there. Everywhere a hodag. Okay, I'm not going to sing a song about it, but it's an interesting story. And Lakeshore Kearney, he wrote a story about the wrote a book about the hodags and other forest beasts in 1928. And I'm going to read to you his story, The Hodag, A Tale from the Logging Camp. Far up in the north woods, among the silvery lakes, there once was a region of tall, swaying pine and evergreen. The people who inhabited this region were sturdy woodsman type, men who lived hard and loved the great outdoors with its primitive life close to nature. The chief beast of burden in this land of primeval timber was the humble ox. Slowly and patiently, treading heavily through the growth of underbrush, over great carpets of pine needles, he conveyed the huge logs out of the forest to a convenient landing place at the side of some stream. His drivers represented several nationalities, so the patient ox had to accustom himself to the different characteristics of his various drivers. Life for him was truly one of oppression. It would be a difficult task to know which of the two, the driver or the ox, had the larger amount of gray matter. In most instances, a close observer would have said the latter was favored. The manner of driving the ox was with considerable persuasion, and at the point of a 3 1/2 foot goad stick. At that time, there was no restriction by legislatures regarding the length of the stick. The ox skinner was noted for his unlimited vocabulary, which consisted of a smattering of the English language together with the extensive use of the profane. The poor ox, not being related to Balaam's ass, had no defense. So on each succeeding winter, there were ox skinners of Irish, French, and Scandinavian, depending upon the nationality of the man who happened to be the driver at the time. Each in his turn goaded and cursed in his native tongue, using the blasphemy characteristic of his nationality. The hide of the ox was reputed to be proof against the elements, but not invulnerable against the profanity of the several drivers. Curses come home to roost, and a constant dripping will wear away stone. Such was the case of the ox, whose life fell under favorable conditions, did not usually exceed 6 years. Thus, mercifully, Providence intervened and took him from his toil. The customary burial ceremony of the ox was cremation, so a huge pile of brush was usually gathered and the remains of the ox placed carefully in the center. The belief of those sturdy woodsmen was that 7 years of continuous fire was necessary to exterminate the profanity which had accumulated in the body of the ox during his life. Accordingly, the brush pile was very frequently replenished, the fire at times leaping high, while at other times it smoldered fitfully. It was at the end of the 7th year of the cremation of an ox, which had led an unusually hard life, that an event was to happen, which would cast its shadow upon every man who witnessed it. As the fire died down, there slowly issued from the great pile of ashes a mystical animal, later to be known as the Hodag. On this particular day, just at twilight, Eugene Shepard, a naturalist of the North Woods, taking his customary quiet stroll into the forest, strode down a favorite trail, breathing the fragrance of the tall pines and hemlocks. Suddenly he became aware of an unusual odor in the air, which aroused his curiosity. On looking further through the depths of the foliage, he discovered a strange creature, so unlike anything he had ever seen before, that it was beyond description. Though a student of woodlore and of both prehistoric and other wild animals, Mr. Shepard could not classify the monstrosity, which was gazing at him with glowing green eyes and sniffing from nostrils of flaming hue. The animal's back resembled that of a dinosaur, and his tail, which extended to an enormous length, had a spear-like end. Sharp spines, 1.5 feet apart, lined the spinal column. The legs were short and massive, and the claws were thick and curved, denoting great strength. The broad, furrowed forehead was covered with coarse, shaggy hair and bore 2 large horns. From the broad, muscular mouth, sharp, glistening white teeth protruded. This strange animal of the woods had an alert movement, and the swish of his tail made the earth tremble. When he exhaled, an obnoxious odor penetrated the atmosphere for some distance. Mr. Shepard was trembling and speechless as he gazed on this horror of the forest. The great naturalist, who had conquered all before, was at his wits' end. Ruminating on a plan by which he might capture the animal, he hastened to the nearby village and disclosed his startling information to the ancient order of the Revealing Society. In the ancient tent of this mysterious order of the Revealing Society behind the closed flap, he related his experience to those great world-renowned men selected from the farthest corners of the earth, men of great courage and chivalry. They were men who, in the rough-and-tumble fight with a bear, would toss their guns into the brush, stick their bowie knives into a nearby tree, and give the big Bruin both underholts in their desire not to take advantage of the beast. This was the type of men he selected to help him capture this formidable nondescript. While planning the capture of his mysterious discovery, Mr. Shepard spent much time in contemplation of the beast's origin. Millions of years ago, in the antediluvian period, many ages before the creation of man, this animal may have been the missing link between the ichthyosaurus and the mylodon. One reason that Mr. Shepard arrived at this conclusion was because the ichthyosaurus attained a length of 100 feet and a height of 20. It had a wonderfully reformed eye, which could be adjusted at will so that the animal could see objects some distance away as well as those nearby. Its principal diet was blue mud, and it was able at some seasons of the year to devour a hill of considerable size in a week. In this connection, it is interesting to note that a parchment found in King Tut's sarcophagus, written by one of his hunters in the dead language, called it a Salbletki, translated by a reporter on the staff of the New North as meaning Hodag. The mylodon was an animal of prehistoric times, so powerful that he could pull down large trees to get the foliage and limbs growing at the top. How to capture the Hodag was a real man-sized job, and none realized it more fully than the heroic Mr. Shepard. He ordered a crew of men to dig a large pit several miles from the point where he had first sighted the animal. This huge excavation, which was 50 feet in diameter and 30 feet deep, was covered with poles thrown across the opening. The trap was successfully hidden by limbs and grass, laid carefully across the poles. While pleased with his strategy, Mr. Shepard selected a man from the North Woods to help with his daring adventure of capturing the hodag. A young man of marathon fame and a noted ski jumper with many honors and medals was considered to be the person most capable of engaging in the exploit. By request, his name is not mentioned because modesty as well as bravery was one of his outstanding characteristics. Because the hodag relished beef on the hoof more than any other food, the ox was to serve mankind in a new way for scientific futurity. The hero led the ox through the dense forest until he came in sight of the monster. Then came a growl so deep, loud, and sepulchral that it fairly shook the earth, causing a vibration so great that it started a great shower of leaves and limbs from the giant trees. The ox became frantic, but his brave leader steered him along the blazed trail with greater force than before. On they went towards the pit, while traveling towards them was the hodag, bent upon capturing his prey. Though the beast's powerful legs were short, he covered the ground with unbelievable swiftness, tearing out trees and the heavy growth of underbrush and leaving in his wake great gashes in the earth itself. At intervals, one could hear an indescribable growl, and with each breath the beast emitted an odor that baffled description. Finally, only 100 yards separated the great animal from his prey, then 40, and then 20 yards. At the crucial moment, one could hear the rasping teeth of the pursuing beast coming together as he opened and closed his ugly jaws. The leader directed the ox in such a manner that he avoided the pit, but the impetus of the great hodag carried him forward over the mass of branches and grass which covered the trap. In he crashed, emitting a roar that could be heard for miles as he struggled to extricate himself. Friendly hands led the hero away, and the ox, with tongue hanging from its mouth, was rewarded with a good bed and plenty to eat that night. The men who had planned this hazardous feat knew to a certainty that there were no sloping foreheads or receding chins in their group. They lost no time in going to the private tent to confer with that mysterious man, Arthur Konitzer, a brother in good standing in their order of the Revealing Society. This man with protruding forehead, known as a mastermind, he never could be accused of being so effeminate as to have pink lace on his underwear, quickly pointed out a way in which Mr. Shepard could exhibit his recently acquired wild animal with safety. This, dear reader, is the true and authentic account of the hodag's capture. Further on in this volume will be found details of its eggs, their size and color and means of hatching, in case any reader should want a setting of the eggs. He is not under any obligation to the writer for the address of a gentleman by the name of Mike Essex of Siberia, Wisconsin, who will be glad to make the shipment. The side hill where Mr. Essex keeps the hodag is an ideal spot, equipped with a powerful derrick capable of handling those precious eggs. So that was the story of how the hodag was caught. Of course, the hodag wasn't real. The so-called hodag was a mock-up of by Mr. Shepard and Mr. Kearney, Lakeshore, love that nickname, of using hide and fur and some paint. And I wouldn't be surprised if they used plaster of Paris, paper mache, to make the spikes, the horns, etc. on there. And they displayed the hodag at many fairs, county fairs, carnivals, sideshows like that. And, of course, there was no live hodag kept in captivity. But these were stories that, they were entertaining. That was meant to be the thing. And, a little scary, especially by a master storyteller. Could, emphasize things at the right moment. You could get somebody just hanging on it. And the great storytellers in the logging camps had that ability. And so Shepard and Kearney, they learned from these men, these storytellers that sat on the deacon seats in the logging camps in the men's shanty, telling their stories in the evening at the camps. And the hodag, like I said, is famous in Rhinelander. And I saw my first hodag yesterday at the Pioneer Park Logging Museum, which is the oldest logging museum in the United States. It opened in 1932, and it's in a complex that had several different buildings in there: the logging museum, a sawmill building, a blacksmith shop, a CCC museum, a railroad museum, a antique motorboat museum. They also had have a narrow gauge steam locomotive and cars out there. So it's a great museum to see, and it's free of charge. Open 10 to 5 daily during the summertime. So it's if you find yourself in the Rhinelander vicinity, go see a hodag. You don't have to go to Pioneer Park to see it, because you're going to see them all over town. There was a big one in front of the Chamber of Commerce. There is Hodag Park downtown, or not directly downtown, but right along the way there, on north of downtown there, along the Wisconsin River. And you can see hodags there. And a lot of businesses have hodags around town, kind of like in some towns where they have moose or cows that people paint. But in this case, they're hodags. And yes, it's a neat story. It's fun. And so the myths and legends of the logging camps of the North Woods, started out as tall tales, as stories just kind of added on to every time they told the story. And, some of them became internationally famous, like Paul Bunyan and his Blue Ox Babe. And, you can see Paul Bunyan statues all over in Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota and everywhere. Not even a logging state, a lumber state, you're going to see statues of Paul Bunyan. So those things are, part of the American fabric now. And the hodag is up there with them. And so hopefully you learned a little bit about a hodag. You heard an entertaining story, maybe one of the first published stories about the hodag. Like I said, it was written in 1928 by Luke Lakeshore Kearney, who was a pal of Eugene Shepard. And so that was, the story of the hodag. So now as, we'd like to say, there was, never let facts get in the way of a good story. So, these were the stories of the logging camps. And, sometimes they get told over and over and over, and, to where people repeat them as truth. Maybe not tall tales, but, legends like that. So hopefully you enjoyed this. And, this was the second one of my live on the road from my 2025 podcast tour, because I'm going to, when I actually post this one or when it goes public, I will be tent camping in Ely, Minnesota, and I will not have any internet connections. So from now on, I'm not going to post any more podcasts until I get back home. On August 18th, we will have part 1 of the labor of logging, and it will be in an Upper Michigan lumber camp. And it'll be the experience, the firsthand account of a young man, age 16, at a logging camp in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in the early 1900s. So thanks for listening in. And as always, if you enjoy the episode, tell a friend. If you really want to help me out, become a supporter. Hit the support button on the website. There's a link to it in the podcast notes on this episode. And you can support for as little as $3 a month to help support keeping North Country History with Rob Berg on the air. So thanks again. And I will be talking to you again when I return from my podcast tour. Bye. North Country History with Rob Berg is hosted, written, and produced by Rob Berg. Music is Crack o' Dawn, performed by Reveille. licensed through Soundstripe. Follow North Country History with Rob Berg on YouTube and on Facebook at Rob Berg, Environmental Historian.